The Frog Princess, a story from Croatia. Once there was an evil king, and if you looked at his heart, it would be as hard and as black as a lump of coal. And he had 3 sons, and he had a wicked wizard for an advisor. Now the oldest son, he was as bad as his father, and he would pull plants out of the garden and laugh when he did it. And the second son would kick the dog and laugh when he did it. But the youngest son, he wouldn't. The youngest son would replant the flowers. The youngest son would give the dog a bone and pet him. The youngest son was named Vinko, and he was sweet and gentle and kind, and everybody loved Vinko except for his father, his 2 brothers, and the wicked wizard. And one day, the king turned to the wicked wizard and said, "We need more money in the kingdom. How can we get it?" "Well, we can't tax the people anymore. We're taxing them 120% now. We can't go to war with the neighbors because they've all beaten us already." "I know what we can do," said the wizard. "We'll marry off the 3 boys to 3 rich families, and then we'll take their money." "That's a great idea," said the king. "How are we going to pick the families?" And the wizard said, "I'll pick them. We'll go to the town square, and we'll say there's a contest, and you'll throw your crown up in the air, and whoever house the crown lands on, the girl who lives there will marry one of the boys. And I'll make sure it lands on the right house." And so it was decreed that 3 young women would be chosen to marry the princes. And so the king took his crown and threw it up in the air, and it whirled and twirled, and it landed on the banker's house. Not only did he have a lot of money, he had a lot of other people's money too. And his daughter would marry the oldest prince. Then the king took his crown again and threw it up in the air, and it whirled and twirled, and it landed on the merchant's house. And he was the richest man in town. And his daughter would marry the middle son. And he took his crown off one more time and threw it up in the middle of the air, and it whirled and twirled and sailed and kept sailing and sailing, and it landed in the middle of the lake outside the city walls. And the king looked at the wizard and said, "Nice going. Row me out. We're going to find it." And so the poor wizard had to row the king out in the boat. And by and large, they found that it didn't land in the water. It landed on a little island. And when the king lifted up the crown and put it on his head, there was a frog underneath the crown. And the frog turned to the king and said, "Hello, king. How are you?" And the king said, "It's a talking frog." And the wizard said, "I've never seen a talking frog before." And the frog said, "I heard that wherever the crown falls, you'll marry the girl who lives there to one of the princes. I have a daughter." Oh, the king thought, "This is wonderful. We'll marry that goody two-shoes youngest son of mine to a frog. That'll teach him a lesson. Go get your daughter." And the frog dove under the water, and she came up with the prettiest little green and red frog, who hopped right into the king's hand. And the mother frog said, "Take good care of my baby." And the king said, "I will." And he came back, and Vinko was waiting. The youngest son was waiting for him, and said, "So, father, did you find your crown?" "I did, and I found your bride." And he held out his hand, and there was the beautiful little green and red frog. She hopped right under Vinko's palm, and he said, "Oh, wonderful." So the next day there was a big wedding, and the first bride wore white silk, and the second bride wore white satin, and the little frog had a little white veil. And at supper that night, the first princess drank her soup like that, and the second princess drank her soup like this. And the little frog sat there, and whenever a fly would go by, she ate it. After about 3 meals, the princesses decided they did not want to share the meals with the frog. They realized that the frog only ate bugs. And so, they were banished. Little Frog and Prince Vinko had to go live in a little cottage at the edge of the kingdom all by themselves. And every day the prince would go off hunting to bring food back. But one day, he thought to himself, wait a minute, I came home last night after hunting and the dishes were all done. And the bed was made. And the clothes were washed. Who could have done that? And every day he kept thinking, who's doing all the chores when I'm gone? And then one day he decided he'd spy on the little frog princess. And he climbed up a tree that looked right in the window, and he looked into the house, and the little frog, she came out, and she looked left, she looked right, and she stood in the middle of the floor, and she grew bigger and bigger and bigger, till she was the size of a full-grown woman, and then she peeled that frog skin off of her, and there was a beautiful girl in a dress of green and red, and she danced around the floor, and she went in to do the dishes. And Vinko looked, and he fell in love. The next day, he hid again. And this time, when she took off her skin and she went into the kitchen, he walked in, took that frog skin and threw it in the fire. And she came out and she said, oh, Vinko, you've broken the curse and I can be a girl forever now. And they laughed and danced around the house. It was wonderful. But pretty soon, word spread that Prince Vinko had a wonderful frog princess wife who was a real person. And people started thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we got rid of our evil king and had a nice king with a nice queen? And word came back to the palace. And the king said, what are we going to do about this? Ooh, wicked wizards said, we can't kill him outright. That would be wrong and the people might revolt. I know. We'll give Vinko 3 impossible tasks to do. And then when he can't do them, we'll condemn him to death. Ooh, the king said, I like it already. He said, send for Vinko. So Vinko was brought to the palace. And the king said, you have 3 tasks to do for me. If you fail any one of them, you'll be put to death and your princess with you. The first task is, you must feed the entire army with 1 pot of food, and it still has to be full at the end of the day. Well, Vinko thought to himself, that's impossible. You can't feed an entire army with 1 pot of food and none of it gone. So he went to his wife and said, they're going to kill us, what are we going to do? She says, shh, don't worry. My mother has a pot just like that at the bottom of the lake. Go ask her. So Vinko went to the lake and he yelled out, mother-in-law, mother-in-law. And the frog came out of the water and she said, yes, son, what do you want? Mother-in-law, I need a pot of food that can feed the whole army and still be full. And she said, no problem. And she dove to the bottom of the lake, came up with a big pot, handed it to Vinko and said, bring it back when you're done. And Vinko took that pot and he fed the entire army, even the regimental dog, and the pot was still full. And the wizard went, how did he do that? And the king said, Next day they brought Vinko back. Vinko, we have a second task for you. When the army takes its nap this afternoon, you have to have a blanket that can cover the whole army at one time. Oh, Vinko went back to his wife and said, how are we going to do this? It's impossible. She says, go ask my mother. She has a blanket like that at the bottom of the lake. So he went to the lake and he yelled out, mother-in-law, mother-in-law. And she came out of the water and said, yes, son, what do you want? I need a blanket that can cover the whole army when they take their nap. And she said, no problem. And she dove to the bottom and came up with a cloth. She said, bring it back when you're done. He went and the army laid down next to each other, all 5,000 men. And that blanket stretched over the entire army. It even covered the regimental dog. And the wizard went, I've never seen anything like that. And the king went, I'm going to tear my hair out. So the next day they brought Vinko back for one more task, the most impossible task of all. The king said, Vinko, I want you to take me, your brothers, and my wizard up so high that we can see the entire country at one time. This is before they had airplanes or helicopters or even balloons. And Vinko went back to his wife and said, "This is impossible. We'll never be able to do this." And she said, "Go ask Mother. She always has an answer for everything." And so Vinko went to the lake and he yelled out, "Mother-in-law! Mother-in-law!" And from the bottom came the frog, and she said, "Yes, son, what do you want?" "I need to take my brothers, my father, and the wizard up so high they can see the whole kingdom. How can I do that?" And she said, "No problem." And she called to some friends on the other side of the lake and overcame not 2, not 4, not 6, but 8 beautiful white swans. And she said, "Take my friends with you. They'll do it." And so the swans followed Vinko through the streets. When they got to the palace, the king and the brothers and the wizard came out and said, "Well, are you going to take us up in the air, or are we going to cut off your head?" And Vinko said, "I think my friends here are going to help." And before anyone could move, 2 swans jumped up, and in their beaks they grabbed the shoulders of the king's coat and started to fly away. And 2 grabbed the oldest son, and 2 grabbed the middle son, and 2 grabbed the wizard, and they flew them high, high, high into the sky, and the king could see the whole kingdom. And he went, "It's beautiful." And then he said, "Now take me down." And the swan said, "Eh." The king said, "I'm the king, take me down." "I demand you take me down." And the swans kept flying and flying and flying and flying till they came to a desert island, and they dropped the king and the 2 wicked brothers and the wicked wizard on a desert island, and no one ever saw them again. And Vinko became king, the frog princess became queen, and the mother-in-law, well, she moved into the palace and did what every mother-in-law does best. She gave everyone advice. That's the story of the Frog Princess.